I keep thinking about when we were kids and how they used to make us practice hiding under our desks in case of an atomic bomb.
Yeah, duck and cover.
Remember that bomb shelter that you bought in the 60s and put it in your backyard? Well, you better check the dates on those air filters. They could be out of date. Welcome back to the Duck and Cover Movie Podcast. My name is Jeremy Anderson, and along with me is my brother Jason Anderson. How are you, sir?
I'm great.
All right, and this week we are doing the TV movie that we honestly never thought would be anything more than just 2 hours of drama, but it ended up being extremely impactful. Is The Day After. And I tell you, it's I've watched it a couple of times leading up to our recording, and that scene, once the air raid sirens start going off, I don't know, it still grips me. It's really crazy.
Yeah, and they did a really good job building up the tension to it.
Yeah,
like better than most movies.
They did.
So one thing that I think is, we've kind of talked a lot about the formula for a end of the world type of movie, and usually it's like you got a sort of a crazy person, or that's how they're perceived. It's trying to warn everyone. Everyone says it's not true, and then they turn out to be right.
Right.
And this is actually kind of the opposite. Everyone knows it. It's the Cold War. Everyone fears it. They try to deny it, and then it just comes to be, Yeah,
and it's interesting to see all the different responses to what's happening. I mean, you've got people that are running scared, you've got people who are doubting, you've got people who are just we're just like we gotta go, we gotta get down to the shelter, we gotta hide, that kind of thing. So I mean, you see, I mean, it just covers everything, and I think they did it really well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they had a good mix of different lives. I mean, like most of these disaster types of movies, they're gonna pick sort of like a diverse group of people and different lives, show what their normal life is, and then how they react to this, this thing happening to them.
Right.
And it's like, it's in Kansas, and so a lot of these people are very similar, and who they are, but they're different. And then we're seeing them and how they react in that moment. Yeah, it's like really good way of showing like how we handle anxiety and that fight or flight.
Oh yeah.
Because like everyone had ideas of what they would do, and then in the moment they all did what they showed. But so I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Okay, so this actually aired on TV November 20th, 1983. And I was looking through it, and when I came across this a little bit, I remembered this. So up until the point where the bombs dropped, they had, I think, one or two commercial breaks. But from that point after, they showed the movie straight through. And because I think, and to me, I think if a commercial break came right there, it would just take me out so fast,
Yeah.
And I think they did the right thing with not doing any breaks whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's see, 83. So because we watched it, I think we were together, right? I mean, we watched it.
Yeah, I think we watched it at home that night. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that was so I was 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah.
And when I remember when that came out, and watching it, it was like, oh, we're gonna watch this movie on TV. What is it? It's a movie about World War III. Oh, okay.
Okay.
What's that mean? You know, whatever. I just thought
Right.
of it as like any World War II John Wayne movie that we would see
Right.
about war. You know, but this doesn't happen yet, and it's in the future. You know, like other movies have been. And then that, you know, so we watched this, and it's like, what is that
Ex-
real?
ex-
Can that happen?
Exactly.
Is that what a nuclear bomb is? You know,
Right. Right.
so you know, I've never been one who has like been about the idea of trigger warnings, but if there was ever a time to have one, it would have been on that show. Because that had an impact.
Oh, I know. I
Yeah,
know. And folks, so just keep in mind, okay, so this is 83. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis was what, a couple decades just
52,
before,
I think. Yeah,
So, here it is, Soviet Union and the United States are button heads, at different places all around the world. And, again, just this idea of, there could be a missile, there could be, missiles coming. And, when, we were in school, we lived about, or we went to school in a city called Mountain View in California.
yeah,
And it was about, I don't know, 30 miles, 40 miles away from Moffett Field Air Force Base. So at the time, Moffett Field was still very much active.
yes.
And, they would have planes, doing touch and goes all the time. There'd be planes flying
Mhm.
around. The pilots are doing everything, to keep themselves ready. I mean, even the city of Sunnyvale, I don't know if it's that way now, but at the time, you could only have buildings, I think, up to 3 stories because planes were coming through, and they had to be able to land, and they didn't want to have to go,
Yeah,
around
I
a
think they
building.
mostly had the C. I forget what it's called, but the C3s,
Oh,
those
okay, yeah,
silver propeller planes that were
yeah,
just constantly in and out, and they were anti-submarine, like looking for nuclear submarines. So you know
yeah,
they would just constantly go. They had no idea what they were, but they were just happening constantly, and it
right,
was like a major bullseye, you know, right there
exactly, and
where
and
NASA
so
was, everything. Yeah,
yeah, and once a year, um, or at least once a year while we were in school, those alarms would go off. Those air sirens would go off, and we kind of joke about oh, duck and cover, but
we had to do
they
it.
actually they
Yeah,
actually made us do it in school.
yeah,
So now yeah, I have no idea if they did that in other places around the country, but at least in areas where you were next to um, a possible strategic strike,
yeah.
I mean, at least if nothing else, we knew that, okay, well, this could be a test, or, we could be saying goodbye to all of our friends while we're
Yeah,
goofing off underneath our desk.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So this movie was directed by Nicholas Meyer. So I looked at some of the things that he's done. He's done some TV, but I think the only, and he has done some movies, but the ones that stood out for me, obviously because I like the genre, he did Star Trek 2, Wrath of Khan. He did 4, Voyage Home, and then he did 6, The Undiscovered Country, which I don't think I saw.
Mhm.
Um, but and then this movie stars Jason Robards as Russell Oakes, JoBeth Williams as Nurse Bauer, a very young Steve Guttenberg,
Mhm.
probably before Police Academy. I'm not
Yeah,
sure, or maybe right around the
I,
time.
I think it was before.
Was it
Yeah,
okay?
I believe so. Yeah,
Uh, he plays Stephen Klein, John Cullum as Jim Dahlberg, John Lithgow as Joe Huxley, and Amy Madigan as Allison Ransom, which I'm not even sure they give her name. She is the pregnant lady that shows up almost about halfway through.
Mhm.
Okay, so interesting thing to note. Um, at one point, it looks like in 1987, they were able to finally allow the people who lived in the Soviet Union to watch the movie, and they asked, I think, two things: one, that they don't edit anything out, and two, as they dub or probably dub,
Translate. Yeah.
um, they were not to change anything. They were to dub it, you know, exactly as is. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. The fact that about 5 years later, the Soviet Union actually got a chance to watch the movie. And I'm curious what they thought of it.
You're right. Yeah, I didn't even know that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things I looked up. I saw that line. I was like, no, I got to copy that. Okay, so The Day After is an American TV film that first aired on November 20th, 1983, on the ABC television network. And I copied a lot of this off of a wiki page, so I'm just reading this verbatim. The film postulates a fictional war between NATO forces and the Warsaw Pact over Germany that rapidly escalates into a full-scale nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. The action itself focuses on the residents of Lawrence, Kansas City, Missouri, and several family farms near American silos, just that are out in the middle of nowhere.
Whiteman Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
The silos are, I guess.
Yeah, and and it was just interesting that a lot of these, and I think one of the things I also remember reading was they wanted to make this movie as sort of a thank you, I think, to the people who their farms were just out in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of that nowhere is a fenced off area and a bunker with a missile silo hatch that could pop open at any moment, and out it goes.
Right.
So, all right. So the way that I did this is as and we're going to go through some of the different information and the story as it is. So this story actually breaks down into 4 areas. The one is Russell Oakes, the doctor, Jim Dahlberg, who is the farmer, Airman First Class Billy McCoy, and then actually the 4th story that is extremely subtle through the whole thing is everything that's going on radio and TV the whole time.
Yes.
Because there's several different areas where people are talking, and the TV is going too.
Right.
And most of the time most of the time you can just ignore all the people that are talking, but you want to listen to what's going on. Now, I have no idea if any of those news broadcasts were real. Probably not. They were probably all scripted. But that's actually the 4th storyline. And what's interesting is none of these storylines, at least the first 3, none of these storylines ever meet.
Right.
So
yeah, the scripted, the story that's happening on the undertone here is what's going on with NATO and Warsaw Pact.
Right.
So if you listen, all those radio broadcasts are scripted, but the story of it is, if you hear it, like what happened, it's the Fulda Gap scenario that was the most anticipated way that the NATO saw how Russia was, or how Warsaw Pact was going to invade. They were going to send tanks. This is what they prepared for, is they were going to send tanks through the Fulda Gap, and that's how they would come in through Europe and invade.
Okay.
And so a lot of our technology that we have, the A-10 Warhog, the Apache helicopter, all those were specifically designed for the Fulda Gap.
Oh,
just for that one encounter that they foresaw would happen, where all these tanks would come through. because there's a lot of mountains in that region, and that's like
Mhm.
where they saw. So they built all around that. So they
Oh,
told a
wow.
full to gap story basically,
Okay.
where okay, Russia, the Soviet Union's coming through, and so what would happen? They would try to stop them. They would fight. They would barrel through, and then we would use strategic nuclear weapons. So
Okay.
these are like artillery shells, things like that, small nuclear weapons, and they would burst
Right.
them over the troops, and then they have to retaliate, right? And then they
Yep.
do that, and they destroy parts of Europe or Berlin for sure,
Yep.
and then West Germany, and then it would start, and then it would be Europe, and then the
Then
U.S.
it would just go. Yeah, they will
Yeah.
go nuts. Yeah.
So they
Gotcha.
they told that was the feared story all throughout the Cold War. That's how
Yeah.
everyone thought we were going to die,
Yeah.
basically. And so that was the story they told, and I thought they did really good with it.
Yeah. They did.
So
So, all right. So the way that the movie unfolds is we have, excuse me, we have the day before, um, and then we have the day of,
the day of,
and then and then
yeah,
after the bombings, actually, it looks like several days
weeks,
pass.
yeah,
Yeah, several days, weeks pass, but they don't really give a lot of information as far as how much time has passed. But we'll cover that as we go. And I think there may be a couple, one or two like story plots that maybe didn't get thought out, or actually what ended up happening, I think, was when Nicholas Meyer originally created this movie, it was actually going to be 2 nights at 2 hours each. So it was going to be
mhm,
4 hours long.
yeah,
But Hollywood, the geniuses that they are, wanted it shrunk down, shrunk down, shrunk down, shrunk down to the
to
point where it
2 hours.
was just one night, 2 hours. And he had to fight. He didn't want commercials at all, or yeah, he didn't want commercials at all. He wanted the thing just played straight
Yeah,
through, which I think for back then was unheard of.
right. Yeah,
I mean, because
who's going to
ads,
pay for it then?
right? Because
Yeah,
ads for TV shows have been, I mean, those things have been around since TV.
right. Yeah. Well, and that's
So
how they get their money.
right, exactly. Yeah, who's going to help it? Well, I think for this movie, you folks
Right.
should just pay for it. But all right, so throughout the scenes of the heart. Oh, so and the other thing that I wanted to just mention real quick before we get started, I know the one thing I noticed is like the music at the beginning of the movie is
Mhm.
very, very sweeping.
Yeah.
Very um
Patriotic sounding.
patriotic, American
Yeah,
heartland.
right.
You see, you see these helicopters flying. They're doing their pickup shots and all this stuff, and it just
Mhm.
makes you feel really good. But
Right.
then the rest of the time, it's like
Yep.
because the world's empty.
Well, I feel like they slowly got there though.
Oh, I know they
Yeah,
absolutely did,
yeah.
but
Like
they certainly
they
didn't play that happy music at the end.
no, no, because it was showing that story and all those, the three stories you were talking about. So you have like what a doctor, so basically almost retired doctor with adult
Yep,
children, kind of at the end of life with
yep,
his wife. They're doing well,
yeah,
right? I mean, these are all like success stories of
sure,
American, you know. And then you had the farmer who's basically has a family with the oldest daughter who's about to get married,
right.
still younger kids, and then the third story was what, the pregnant woman you said?
No, well, actually, it was the airman. The
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So you have the military perspective of what that's like, and he too was, his wife was on base, and stationed there, and then they show that perspective, and
yeah.
so they're, I think they tried to kind of get this broad view of like what normal successful life looked like in the United States at that time,
Right.
you know.
So, all right. So, as I was saying, what I did was I made as I was making notes. I color coded the D storyline, for lack of a better term, the radio storyline, the TV
Mhm.
storyline. So throughout the scenes of Heartland life and the current tension, the TV, radio, and newspapers chatter about the Warsaw Pact buildup on the eastern border and the dispatch of nuclear weapons in Europe. Toward nightfall, East Germany blockades West Berlin. The U.S. issues an ultimatum calling for the Soviets to end the blockade of West Berlin by evening and places its military forces on high alert.
Mhm.
So that's at the end of the day. So at the beginning of um, the day before, you've got Dr. Russell, who is meeting with his daughter.
Mhm.
Um, and the daughter's talking about moving to Boston with her boyfriend.
Right.
So it sounds like his one and only kid, even though she says,
Well, he has
well,
a son too, who's in
oh,
high
that's right. He
school.
has a son too
Yeah.
in high school.
Yeah.
That's right. So, he says, well, look, you haven't lived in my house for a couple of years. And, she's just trying to say, look, I need to, I need to separate, I need to just move away and begin
Mhm.
my life.
Right.
So, he goes back home, to his wife and is just like, the wife figures out, oh, you talked, didn't you? And so they're, they're working through the fact that they're about to lose their older daughter to another state.
Right.
Then you have Jim Dahlberg and his family are preparing for their daughter Denise, who is supposed to get married in 2 days. And boy, she annoyed me. Her and her sister just, but I
Yeah.
mean, I think it was probably typical,
Yeah.
of you know, Jolene. Just that's all you ever heard from this girl is just her
Yeah.
yelling into Jolene.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
watched that, with 5 kids, and it's like, yeah, that's
yeah, it's like,
how it goes.
so you've got that story. The mom is focused on getting starting to prepare food, getting everything ready. It sounds like the wedding may be actually the wedding is going to be at a church. So they're supposed to be meeting at a church with the pastor or reverend at the time at the at their beginning at the beginning of their storyline.
Mhm.
And of course they've been off, they spent the night together and they come showing up late. So you can kind of see, dad's mad because, she's living the life that he doesn't want to, like
Right.
no sex before marriage kind of thing. So,
Mhm.
he's being a dad. And then then we go to story C, where we've got Airman First Class Billy McCoy as a mechanic, and he's showing up at a missile silo to do last minute work.
Right.
And so they are in the area as that day as that day finishes out.
Well, and he's about to go on 30 days leave.
Right.
And, and someone else in the helicopter is like, "Hey, I wouldn't go too far."
Yeah.
"Why?" He's looking at the newspaper. "I just have a
Right.
hunch." Right.
Yeah, and they they just continue to give little subtle hints that something is coming,
Yeah.
but they don't want to make it so don't go. They don't want
Right.
to do that because that spoils the buildup. um, all right, so the next day, the NATO forces attempt to break through the blockade. They suffer heavy casualties. Warsaw Pact MiGs strike civilian targets and military targets in West Germany. So again, this is now the day of, and things are continuing to build up. Um, Dr. Oakes. So, and I'm going to be going back. We'll be going back and forth, to the
Mhm.
different stories, and we'll make sure that we call them out as we go. But we're just progressing to the midway point
Yeah.
of the story. So, like you already said, Oakes goes and visits his son while he's at football practice, and he's there talking with another dad, and they're just discussing how their
Mhm.
sons are playing. So
Yeah.
that probably assumes then that I don't remember how old they said the son was, but that probably means that the daughter is probably like in her mid 20s, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah,
you
I think
know,
he was like a senior. I think it was
was
like
he?
a, I
Okay.
think so, yeah.
So he's probably 17, 18. So
Uh-huh.
yeah. So if, if the daughter is probably in her, mid 20s, then yeah, she's at a point in her life where it's, time for her to move out on her own and
Mhm.
move on. So the word goes out that the Soviets have invaded West Germany. NATO is unable to stop Soviet invasion and threatens the use of nuclear weapons should the Soviets continue advancing toward south towards the rest of Europe.
Mhm.
So, and again, the Dahlbergs are again preparing for the wedding tomorrow.
Right.
The Denise is still wanting to go and hang out with what's the kid's name? I know I put it up here somewhere. No, I don't have it. It's somewhere. But
Yeah.
anyway,
The boyfriend?
the
You talking about?
boyfriend, the fiance,
Oh,
so she wants to go and spend time with him, and so that so they run off and they continue to go and
mhm.
do whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
So now the Oaks story now moves to University of Kansas. So he
Mhm.
works in the hospital there or in the area. So now we're introduced to Stephen Klein, who is Gutenberg. And we also see that the boyfriend, the fiance, is there as well. He is a student there. Um, Gutenberg is a pre-med student. And again, at the same time, while they're there, checking in and getting ready for classes and stuff like that, they are continuing the background story of the buildup and the different things that are going on. The American and Soviet navies battle in the Persian Gulf, and there's a rumor of nuclear strikes on the outskirts of Frankfurt. So, and there's also a talk about um, the I forget which one it was, but either the Soviets struck an American ship or vice versa, and then they were
Yeah.
getting ready to
The
retaliate.
Soviets hit an American ship first
Okay,
in the
and
Persian
then they
Gulf,
were and they
and
were
then
getting ready to retaliate. Yeah.
they retaliated. Yeah. So yeah, because and like during this time, it's kind of interesting because the doctor, when he's hearing this stuff, he's sort of like going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
So there's kind of this idea. I mean, you can tell he's taking it seriously, but he's like, we've seen this before, and talking to his
Right.
wife about it. You remember that? We thought we
Right.
were going to die. We're looking outside the window watching for missiles. So there's kind of that idea of like, it's just kind of a piece of denial, right? It's like,
Right.
we've seen this before. It'll work out. It'll work out.
Yeah, and that's interesting too because so you've got somebody, I would assume that the doctor and then the Dahlberg family probably both lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis,
Mhm.
but with the Dahlbergs, being like they look like they're probably in their 40s, they may
Yeah.
have been a lot younger. So maybe the idea of, the Cuban Missile Crisis maybe didn't have as much of an impact as, what's about to happen.
Yeah.
So they're
Well,
they're not taking it as
yeah.
as crazy.
Well, I think that's the whole thing. So with the doctor and his wife, I mean, he's working, but it's almost like they're retired, so they don't have as much going on in their lives.
Right, right.
So they have time to think about this and talk about it. But with the Dahlbergs, it's like, man, life is busy, right? Like, you got young
Yep,
kids, old kids, and
yep,
that just in that scene, when you see him, the dad, he's watching the baseball game. There's a big argument going on upstairs with the kids. Mom's trying to, it's just chaotic, and
yeah,
he's just sitting there staring, watching the TV, listening to the report as it, breaks
right.
about what's going on, and he's just kind of oblivious to what's going on. He's not talking to anyone. You know, he's not saying anything to anybody. Oh man, you see what's going on? He's just sitting there
Mhm.
quiet. He walks outside, looks up at the stars, you know, and he's kind of looking back and seeing the family just oblivious.
Right.
So I think, you know, that's kind of representing like probably most of us, right? That's
Right.
what it would be like, you know.
And
So
then you've got the kids at the university
yeah.
who a lot of them are sitting around, listening to the news and stuff like that. But I got a feeling that a lot of them are just like, eh,
Yeah. Well,
they're
some of
not
it,
taking
yeah.
it as,
That was pretty good too, because I mean that's where you saw was it John Lithgow, right? That was in
yeah,
that. But also the students. So you have that one student where she was like, "Oh, come on, you know,
yep,
don't worry. I mean, we're just going to
yeah,
let Berlin go. Remember what happened to Poland? What happened to the Czechs? You
yep,
know, which
yep,
is true. Like NATO, you know, made a big stance on it, but they ended up getting taken. They didn't do anything. So that was part of the views. Is like, you know, NATO talks a big game, but they're not going to do anything. They're not going to end it.
exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
so
So you've
they
got,
got that piece out.
yeah. So you've got three different, very strong, storylines, three different,
Yeah,
and three different, I would say, opinions of just how people were taking even just things going on at that time.
yeah,
I mean, I remember always hearing stories about, on the news, and I mean, I think I was 11. I had just turned 11, about a month or two before, and um, most of this didn't make any
yeah,
sense to me. You would see stuff on the news,
yeah.
and but for someone as young as that, you have no idea
Right,
what's going on, and so you look to the parents, you look to the people who are older,
right.
and I mean, I unless I'm wrong, I mean, it didn't seem like our parents were too terribly worried
Hmm.
about what was going on, but they were also still protective,
Right.
as well. They weren't like, "Oh, just turn that off. That's just
Yeah,
that's just garbage." So it
yeah.
wasn't like that.
Well, I actually remember that because I mean the one thing that happened in that scene too on the university with John Lithgow, because I remember this like when I was a kid. For some reason, it made sense to me.
Hmm.
But you know that scene where the boyfriend is getting his haircut, and
Right.
he's like, you know, what's the big deal? Like we're way out in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. Who's going to attack
Right.
us?
Right.
And John Lithgow's character is like, oh, what are you talking about? There's no nowhere anymore. Don't you know where you are? Like this is the ICBM site. Like
Right.
we're a big bullseye, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I remember watching that. I was like, oh, really? Like, yeah, because
Yeah.
that's what I would have thought. Like, there's nothing going on here. Who's going to attack this? Like, that's
Right.
for attacking the army. You know, we're
Oh,
over there.
exactly. Yeah, because not too far away, what for
Yeah,
them is a missile silo. But see, again, the people have grown up with it, so they just like, it just sits there,
right.
never really thinking that, well, somebody who's really mad at us could just say, well, you know what, maybe we can get one of our bombs over there before they get that one out of the hole,
Hmm.
or hit that Air Force base that's not too far away, and maybe we can eliminate, some threat against
Yeah.
us. So
Well,
yeah,
I was so freaked out about that when I saw that movie for like a long time. I remember because it would keep me up at night. So I would talk to our mom and dad about it, and it's interesting now looking back. But basically, when I talked to our mom, you know, she was kind of like the Dolberg mom, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
look, man, there's nothing we can do about that. Come on, we got things to do, you know.
right.
So it's kind of like that, you know. And then we talked to our dad about it, and he was like, "Yep, the Russians could nuke us at any time. Yep, the Soviets." You know, he was all into that, but you know, he would talk about, I just heard on the radio, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah,
Yep, they're gonna nuke us anytime. He didn't know what he was talking about, but you know, made it sound like he did. You know,
right.
but yeah, yeah,
No, absolutely. It was just crazy. Okay, so things continue in all three storylines to just unravel. At some point, Oaks decides he's going to head home, and he wants to go be with his wife.
Mhm.
And so he is driving, and he's just getting caught in traffic. It's just nuts. And then at some point, the emergency broadcast system kicks in
Right.
and starts telling people, I think, to go indoors. I think that's what the first message was.
Yeah, if you're it was anyone on the road to get off the road.
That was it. Yeah. And so he decides, so you see him actually start speeding up, going along the side of the road, and wants to get a hold of his wife. And remember, folks, 1983, I didn't have these at
No, you
all.
have the payphone scene
Yep.
in there
You have the
where there's
payphone
lines
scene.
of payphones. Yeah.
So he probably pulled over, probably saw the first payphone that was there, but
There's a
there's
line.
like, 20 people there all lined up.
Mm.
So, trying to get a hold of somebody back then, I mean, you had to work at it. You had to physically walk up, you had to have money in your hand. You had to come, throw a couple dimes or a quarter in, dial. You had to remember the number, you
Right.
know. So,
Well, yeah, but what's also interesting, like all the storylines, even the sort of subplots or whatever you want to call it, or the secondary stories, like every single person wanted to go home.
yeah,
All of them. They all
yeah,
wanted to go home.
yeah,
The guy who was in the Air Force Base, just wanted to run home. Remember, he didn't go down in the tunnel.
right,
Everybody, and the
yep,
guy, it was like, I think I'll go home, which was Joplin. I don't know how far that is, but uh, he did that and hitchhiked,
yeah,
and everyone turned around to go home. So I think that was kind of telling. I think in a panic situation, that's probably everyone's first response.
sure,
You
yeah,
know,
and it could, yeah, and I think it's just I think it's just one of those, that when you talk about, fight or flight, I think when it
Mhm.
comes time to flight, it's like, okay, I'm going home.
Yeah, yeah,
Because for me, that is the place that I feel safe, that I can
right.
control. And yeah, a bomb may drop next to my house and, may blow up, but at least I'm home.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, because it's a place of sanity for you.
Right.
Um, so as the Warsaw Pact continues to advance, NATO air bursts 3 tactical nuclear weapons over the forces in a desperate last ditch attempt to stop them. The Soviets retaliate by destroying regional NATO headquarters with another nuclear detonation. Minutes apart, the United States launches its Minuteman missiles, and personnel aboard EC-135 Looking Glass are flying over Canada, tracking the inbound ICBMs. So the one thing that I wanted to, I forgot to mention in the beginning, that I want to throw in really quickly, that I thought was interesting, was the footage that they got from the military,
Yeah.
from
The
them
stock
doing
footage.
their
Mhm.
yeah, and doing their test runs and stuff like that. And I don't know, I thought that was interesting, just seeing all the things that go on.
Yeah.
When they show the stuff in the bunkers, that was reminding me of war games.
Yeah.
And just this idea that you've got these people who are scurrying around trying to give information. I mean, nowadays, we have radars galore, and there's satellites and can look at anything and everything anywhere.
Mhm.
But back then, you had to have planes way up in the air in order to be able to be high enough to see, okay, here comes the missiles, that kind of thing. And they
Well,
they had to be up
yeah,
there.
they had radar. The reason that they're up in the air, the B-52s, is they just constantly keep them up because they're carrying bombs, and they would go right over and at any moment's notice and
Oh,
then
okay.
drop. So, but you had like radar aircraft up there, and then they had the one where they're showing the general they show him in the
Yeah.
very beginning. I forget what the SAC commander.
Yeah.
There's always a SAC commander up there that kind of gives orders, but all those B-52s are up there and they're rotating around. So anytime, and then they show a scramble, right, which is when
Right.
all the ones on the ground, they try to get them up so they don't get bombed, right?
Right.
And yeah, so they're going to be the first to see the inbound missiles because
Yeah.
they're closest to where they're coming from. So yeah, I think in there they said, there's like 300. That's what they always anticipate is like 300 inbound missiles.
Right.
Each of those carrying 5 warheads or 4 warheads. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, basically our strategic, from what I understand, our strategic nuclear response is B-52s or the aircraft, and then you have the ICBMs that launch from the ground, and then submarines. But they didn't mention submarines at all.
Right.
So
I don't think at all. I don't think they ever discussed
Yeah.
that at all. So,
yeah,
all right. So, so at one point, so once Oak starts, he's trying to head home, and then we switch to the Dahlbergs, and he's been working the field, but he's also really been paying attention too. And at one point, he tells his son to take those huge containers, and he's like, fill those up with water, take them into the basement.
Mhm.
And he's taking the whole time you see him, he's taking stuff into the basement, and the wife is just like, look, you're gonna have to do this without me because I got all this food I gotta I gotta make for tomorrow, and I need you to basically it's like I need you to quit playing around and come help me make food.
Yeah. Well, she's in denial, right? She's trying to just,
Yeah,
stay
Yeah.
distracted, pretend it's not happening, So
and then so like you said, you've got McCoy who ends up who's still in at that silo. They've already sealed up, and then you've got all the rest of the guys that are there, and they're yelling, trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do? You've got those guys who are in the bunker who are going to be safe for the next couple of weeks, are going to have food and all this stuff. What are we going to do? So at one point they decide to crawl down into a elevator tunnel, I think it was, and I guess there was a place where they could try to go in and hide.
Right.
But McCoy's like, nah, dude, I'm out.
Yeah.
I got to go find my family. So he jumps in the truck, he takes off, and he's trying to head to home to get to his family. So the last thing that we really see is, well, actually, so just before that, now we've got, just before the actual explosions, is now we have the EMP that goes off, and I had never heard of the term EMP or electrical magnetic pulse. And I think even at that age, I still had no idea what that was. And I thought, when I saw that, I thought that was just something they did for the movie. I had no idea that that's actually something that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they did. I don't think they mentioned it. They didn't say.
They do later on.
Later, yeah. But like at the time, like no one ever talked about it. You just see this like bright light in the sky, and then all the power's off. It's like not just the power, it's the cars too. Anything with a battery.
Yeah, so power, offices going out, hospitals, cars are dying, everything just comes to a standstill.
Right.
And then you've got the I don't know, this is something that I talked to Mom about that I found interesting, was at the point where it was like, okay, we have to go down now. Dahlberg, he goes upstairs, finds his wife, she's making the bed, and he's just like, nah, that's it. Grabs her around the waist, and her, screaming and trying to get away. To me, that just sent shivers up my spine, just because it just felt so real.
Yeah, it did.
In that moment, that actor's choice of, just like, I'm completely in denial. This is not happening. This is not going. When in actuality, it is. So you're now having to deal with, an actual truth, even though it sucks. You're now having to deal with the devastation of, well, my world is about to come crumbling apart.
Yeah, no, this is what separates this movie from like all the other disaster movies. Like, in the other disaster movies, there's always the deniers, and you're always like, oh God, they're being so stupid. Come on, can't you tell it's coming? in this one, it's just like, oh, I totally feel that.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
like I can totally see where she's coming from. That would be me. You know,
Yep. Oh
like
yeah.
it's just like you just don't want this to happen. And then all the other disaster movies, you want it to happen. That's why you're watching this.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
All right. So now we get to the halfway point. Oh, and we're 45 minutes into this. We're going to be doing this for a while. Okay. So now we get to the explosion. And again, obviously, these aren't, they're not practical effects, obviously, but the way that they, changed all the coloring
Mhm.
of, just making the explosion, you see the cloud and it's very red, and you got all these other colors that are spreading through. I thought that they did a really good job with the way that looked.
Yeah. Especially at
Um,
the time. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, because in a made for TV movie, like,
yeah,
yeah, because I remember seeing that, I'm still at this point, the age I watched this, expecting explosions that you see in Hollywood,
right.
and then it's
Where it's
like,
just boom. Okay,
yeah,
move on.
and then this blast happens and you see this cloud. You're like, what? And then,
Yeah,
the irradiation scene or
yep.
whatever you call that, where everyone or is
Just
incinerated. It
yep,
shows their skeletons.
yep,
It's just like, and here it is. These characters you're starting to get to know,
yep,
right? You've got the doctor's daughter,
yep.
the boyfriend.
The
So,
boyfriend.
how we watch movies, people don't get killed off that quick, and then
Right,
they're gone. Gone.
right. And
Yeah.
then you've got one family they were all outside. I
Yeah.
mean, they didn't really go into that, but then it's just fire across the screen. They're gone.
Yeah. They're all
You
gone.
know, just that. Yeah, that. I mean, I honestly think that I just remember sitting there going, because
Mhm.
because again, like you said, you've got because I don't think any of the movies that we watched back then um ever had explosions that look like that. I mean, like you said, it's stuff fireball and it's done,
Right.
right? But I mean, what I mean, Jedi had just come out a few months before,
Yeah.
and so there's certainly not anything like that. And I don't remember ever seeing any kind of movie back then that ever dealt with like, with a story like this where
Right.
it was a nuclear explosion.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the movies, maybe in the 70s, but I mean, I don't remember. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
No,
that, but you would have it after the explosion.
right. No, you had like DEFCON 4,
Yeah.
and you had uh what was the Stanley Kubrick one? Dr. Strangelove, but
Oh,
none of
yeah,
those
yeah.
actually showed the bombs
Right.
happening. They just
Right.
talked about it and said it was going on.
Yeah.
And they would show something on a screen happening, like with a blip or something, but you never actually
Right.
saw it like that ever. Like I didn't see anything.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, this is a really big step in storytelling, at
right.
least for me, the fact that, excuse me, again, here I am, 11 years old, and I'm seeing this, and it really made an impact.
Right.
You
Right.
know, so like you said, we see the doctor's daughter die and the boyfriend die. We see a
Mhm.
family
Yeah. Well,
that we saw just for a few seconds. They're gone. We also see um, Dahlberg's son get blinded by
mhm.
staring at one of the explosions. He
Yeah.
was running and he sees it. The
Yeah.
flash pops, and
Not
so
even staring, just like looking
just
in that direction.
yeah, and it
And
just
just
flip,
yep.
and so his sight is gone probably for the rest of his life, depending on
Right.
how long he lives.
Right.
So he ends up taking his son down. So all of Dahlberg's family is there in the basement. So they're there. Um, Gutenberg finds his way into a building. He hides when the explosion goes off. Um, the doctor is in his car when the bomb goes off.
Yeah, and
And then you've
he had
got
left Kansas City, so,
yeah,
he was right? Isn't that how that went? Because he was headed on the freeway, but he ended up getting somewhere where there was no direct hit,
Right.
basically. Yeah.
But where, when after the thing went off, he ends up making his way back to the hospital,
Right.
and because he's out in the fallout, that's what starts causing him to get sick.
Yeah.
Um, Now at the same time, we've also been introduced to a couple other doctors, probably somebody that runs the hospital. So you've got all these other minor characters that are interacting at least with the doctor and with um, the other guy, the other guy that's there, John Lithgow, his character, because he's in one of the university buildings where the doctor is in the hospital. So they're interacting. They end up interacting via radio once they get that
Mhm.
connected. So now the rest of the movie, honestly, is just watching how everybody deals with deals with what happened. You've got Gutenberg ends up getting out of that building and ends up making his way to the Dahlberg house. Now, again, time from the explosion on, time doesn't get explained.
Right.
I mean, it goes on quite a bit, and so we have no idea like how long it took for him to wander over to their house. He ends up making his way in, gets the door open to the basement. They let him come in and stay. But again, he's been out in it. So, we know that he's on the fast track to
Yeah.
to
Well,
being dead
he was
eventually.
out of it. He was miles away from the university. He was, remember, he hitchhiked. He was hitchhiking to Joplin
Joplin.
to go
Yeah.
home, and he got off in some town, and he was like on this road, and he jumped into a building when the blast wave
Right.
hit. Yeah,
Right.
and so he wanders. I guess he's going to a more rural area, obviously,
Yeah.
and then stumbles into with them.
Right. And at that point, I think well, we also no, because that's the first time we hear somebody walking around and it's him coming in.
Mhm.
When they eventually, well, at one point, Denise just goes nuts, and she's
Takes
like,
them.
I got to get out of here. So she
Yeah.
goes running out. Gutenberg chases her, and then he's explaining. She's like, "Oh, it's a great day. Look, it's beautiful." And he's like,
Yeah.
"Nope." And he's explaining what all the stuff
Radiation
that's
was.
happening, the
Yeah.
radiation. All these little things are blowing through your body. You have no idea.
Yeah.
And eventually, he just kind of talks her down and takes her back in.
Right.
Um, so she's losing her mind, and I think that just kind of just starts the decline for her.
Yeah.
Especially with the, I mean, she never, I don't think she ever finds out that the boyfriend is dead, but is probably assuming, because she keeps yelling, well, I should have at least got pregnant, we should have at least got married or eloped or something, you know
Mhm.
regrets, but what are you going to do with that?
Right.
um so the doctor, like I said, is working with the Lithgow character. They keep communicating. They're also watching the rad levels,
Right.
but at the same time, you've got at the hospital, you've got people who are displaced, who have nowhere to go, and they're injured, they're sick. So where do you go for that?
Yeah.
You go to a hospital. So you've got this huge influx of people that are slowly making their way, because this is a big, I think this is a teaching hospital too. So you've got this huge
The
university,
university. Yeah.
and so that's what eventually, I mean, at one point they get into an argument about leaving a lot of the sick people out there, or leaving a lot of the people out there, but we're only bringing in the sick people. And then eventually they're just like, you know what, no, just open the doors.
Yeah.
And because we've got to house
Right.
these people somewhere.
Yeah.
And you've got that shot at near the end of the movie where it looks like it's in a huge gymnasium at that university, and the
Mhm.
camera just follows Gutenberg in and just slowly pans and
Right.
pulls back, and you just see the whole floor is just covered with people,
Mhm.
who are sick and dying, and that may just end up being the last place that they live.
Right.
So, um, okay, let's see here. Um, uh, I'm kind of going back through all this. Some of this stuff we kind of jumped ahead. Oh yeah, so McCoy ends up, um, taking off. He makes his way to a couple of camps, and at one point he finds a guy who's mute, or we think he's mute because he never talks,
Mhm.
and so he kind of buddies up with him, and they end up making their way eventually
To the
to
hospital, right?
to the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he ends up there at the end. But
Yeah.
the
He's like
um
unrecognizable at that point.
oh yeah,
Mhm.
at that one point where he wakes up, where's my shirt? My shirt.
Right.
I mean, his hair is gone. He's his skin's all tore up, and he's
Yeah.
just like, so that and even the makeup, and the different, just
Mhm.
showing the decay of skin. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they just did really good. Um, there's also talks about firing squads, about justice being swift,
Mhm.
and nobody, it's like, you steal something, no, there's no trial, you're
Right.
dead.
Yeah.
Um, and at one point, you have that military truck that pulls in to the university there, but by that point, um, the number of people has grown so much that the fact that the military is bringing in food, and not everybody's getting food, and then they say, oh, that's it, we got to go.
Yeah.
The people riot, and they're like, no, no, you're gonna give us everything that you have. So those guys are pulled out, and they storm the truck.
Right. Right. Yeah.
um so all right, so again, time continues to move on a little bit. Dahlberg and some other farmers are, um I don't know, they're sort of like at I don't know, like a town meeting, or something along those lines, and there's a guy that's there that's talking about, they need to start growing crops for the next season, and they have to grow food that is more for human consumption and not animal consumption. And then they're also talking about, scraping off, the first several inches of topsoil, scraping that away, because that's not going to do any good. But what's interesting is, um, that here in this movie they talk about 4 or 5 inches. In Jericho, they actually say
Eight-
18 inches.
18. Yeah.
Yeah, which I mean, there's quite a bit of difference between 5 inches and 18 inches.
Right.
And the thing that I like was some of the questions they were asking, like, well, where am I supposed to put this? How do I know that scraping all that stuff away is going to put, yeah, like, yeah, where am I supposed to put it? And he was saying he says a lot of us have 150 to 200 acres.
Mhm.
So you want me to go and
Yeah.
scrape
There's no
off?
way they could do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was like I believe it was like the civil defense type of stuff. What they were I think they
Okay.
were reading from like a civil defense manual,
Okay. Yeah.
where they're getting this stuff because they were like, and they're like, okay, this is what it says, you got dig down to now maybe that was Jericho. I'm not sure. But I think that might have been Jericho where they were reading from that. But that's where that all came from. This they invested on the civil defense information stuff.
Yeah.
Where they talk about where to go underground. Well, and that's where they came up with like public shelters and that sort of thing at the time.
Yeah.
But I think that's what they were trying to kind of hit at, is like, this is what it would, this is what bureaucracy would look like if,
Right.
at this point, where they're just kind of talking about doing these things to try to get society back. And like,
Yeah. And then
it's
they were
impossible.
having they were talking about, well, there will be this council that will make these decisions, and the farmers were like, "What council?
Right.
Who's going to come in from wherever to come and counsel it? Nobody's going to do that."
Yeah. Yeah.
So now after that, he ends up going home. He ends up riding his horse home, and when he gets there, there's several people. It's nighttime. There's several people that are in his yard that are cooking one of the animals, that died on his farm. And he gets off the horse, he pulls out his rifle and goes to confront them, but but not in a way that he's getting ready to shoot. But what ends up happening is another guy comes in around from behind him, takes his own rifle and shoots him.
Mhm.
So Jim Dahlberg ends up dying. The wife and the younger daughter are in there. um they hear the gunshot go off, and then that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like up to you to figure out, well, what happens next.
Right.
And I think a lot of that, just the way that they kind of wrap up a lot of these stories, is you get to figure out what happened
Yeah.
next.
Well, this movie, like, have you heard of, or did you watch Threads?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. So Threads was like the English version of this movie
Oh really?
in 1984. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And it sort of made The Day After look like extremely optimistic.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, especially the end.
Mm.
You can see it on YouTube. It's free on there. You should watch that one. But basically, same kind of thing. It's the same exact story.
Right.
Same structure and story too. Uh, but the sort of the in that aftermath of that one, everybody dies. Not only dies, but everyone gets taken advantage of, raped, all of it. It's like,
Oh,
it's horrible.
it
But
gets really, yeah.
this was sort of more of a, like, leave it to your imagination
Okay.
type of thing, which I actually thought was better. I thought it was more powerful
Yeah.
story, because with Threads, when you watch that one, I mean, that looks bad, but it's a linear plot and it goes right down. It doesn't leave any room to the imagination. But
Okay.
Day After just felt like, oh, you can only imagine what happens next. Not going to be good, you know.
Yeah.
So
I can picture that. Yeah.
yeah. So I thought the way that they left that had much more of an impact than something like Threads did. But yeah, um,
Kind of the story kind of or the way you're kind of describing it reminds me of like 28 Days Later.
mm, yeah,
Where you know exactly what happens to
right,
pretty much everybody.
yeah, yeah,
There's no imagination there. You
right,
see it.
yep, yeah. So let's see, and then last one is the doctors. He ends up, well, he leaves and he's still determined to go home, right? Which is, and his home is, you can tell, is there's nothing left, like not
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
debris or rubble. It was like right at the impact site,
Yeah.
probably. And he just kind of sits on his lot,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
someone's there on his property,
Uh, you're
and
in
he's like,
my house.
"Hey, you're in my house." The guy's like, it's like,
Yeah. He's offering him what I think an onion. He's like,
yeah.
here's an onion.
He's like, okay, whatever. Doesn't
And then
matter.
he just kind of falls down, starts crying, and the other person just comes over, just kind of wraps his arm around him.
Yeah,
The camera pulls away, and and that's
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So I think what's nice is we don't have to be told what happened to the wife,
right,
right? The fact that the house is in rubbles is
Yeah.
explanation enough.
Yeah.
We're kind of curious about, well, what happened to the rest of the Dahlberg family. You've got Gutenberg, who has lost all of his hair. Denise is almost lost hers, and he walks in, sees her, and he's just like, well, I got permission to take you home. So he's going to take her and the kid who was blind, because that he ended up taking him to the hospital, and they're just eventually going to go home.
Yeah.
And we have no idea if they're going to make it, because the radiation sickness is slowly kicking in for the two of them.
Right.
The son, the young boy, doesn't seem to. I don't think he had it as bad, except for obviously getting blinded.
Right.
And then like the nurse. So here's one of the storylines that I was thinking of when I made the mention earlier about the movie being 4 hours. Is we have this nurse who is she's there, she's always working, she's always helping, even when the doctor passes out, she's there. And then all of a sudden when he gets up, oh no, she's there when he gets up, but the next time we see him, she's dead. And apparently she died from meningitis that she had picked up. But the fact that we don't see her again, and then they just it's just, yeah, she's dead. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I wish it's one of those. I wish that they could have. I don't know. I wish they could have just released the whole thing as it is. It would have been interesting to see. But the way that they described it is that probably a lot of the storylines before the explosion might have gotten bloated. And it could have just been that they were showing things that really weren't there to help push the story.
So there is a 4-hour version.
I don't think so. Originally, when the movie was created, it was 4 hours, and it was going to be split into 2 days, 2 hours one day, 2 hours the next. Because there have been movies over the years where they have done that.
Right.
But with this one, the network said, nah, it's too much. A lot of the stories were, like I said, they were just too bloated. There was just stuff that they really didn't need. I think at one point, Meyer ended up actually leaving, and then came back with the authority to at least be able to do one night, right? Get the movie the way that he really felt it needed to be said, and shown from the explosion after not having any commercials. So
what's so interesting, I mean, this is years ago, but I swear it was over 2 days.
Yeah, no, according to what I found, it was all in one night. And it was because it shows that the movie has a runtime of just over 120 minutes. So so those commercial breaks probably were not that long.
Right.
It was probably just enough to cover, and it could have been that it aired maybe for 2.5 hours, because back then it could have been like 8 to 10:30 maybe, or something like that.
This is almost like one of those Mandela effect things. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Like this is what it feels, because I swear that was a longer movie. And the other thing too, remember, we're kind of going way back here, but before Blockbuster, right? There was where we would rent movies in California, the Warehouse.
Yep.
And we would go look at movies all the time. And I swear that was a 2 cassette thing.
Oh, okay.
That's
interesting.
I always looked at it because I saw it on TV and it scared the crap out of me. So,
so I want to go watch it again.
There it is. But it was 2 cassettes. I swear that's what it was. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I thought it was over 2 nights, because I remember it ended. I thought it had ended at the point where the war had like where the opening scene where it's like nuclear winter looking.
Yeah.
That was the next point, but maybe not.
Oh yeah.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
How long ago was that? 40? Is that 40 years ago?
So
40 years.
Yeah, 40 years.
Oh,
40 years. Because November would be it came out in November, so this year would be 41.
Wow.
So yeah, again, folks, it was just one of those things where, if you didn't live through that era, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or even all the things that the Cold War that happened after, you may watch the movie and just think of it as just a Hollywood movie. But for the both of us, I mean, it had a profound impact on us. And because you watch a lot of these movies and it's fiction, even this was fiction, but it was the fact that this movie was really close to it could possibly happen,
right.
Rather than all of a sudden aliens just show up and they start flying in and bombard us and all
Right.
this stuff, and Independence Day kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it so I think watching this and then watching it again, I don't know, to me it was very, very interesting, and again, still very profound for me watching it. I mean, I even watched it again today, and it was funny because a lot of times I'll watch movies, and when it gets to points where it's like, okay, this is just dialogue, it's boring, I'll tend to fast forward. But every time that I watched this, I watched it straight through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
never
It was
skipped
decent.
anything.
Yeah. I mean, even the dialogue, it's still 80s, and it still kind of feels that 80s drama, or that little over dramatic. But I mean, I really felt like they did a decent job with the dialogue. It felt very real, So yeah, it was.
And the great thing is, most of the people that were there, because they actually filmed in Lawrence, Kansas, and they actually filmed, I think, at that university. So a lot of those people were actually, the background extras were all from that town.
Right.
So I mean, that had to be kind of cool for a lot of them. And then the thing that really brought it home also, and I don't want to go on too long, but was the fact that immediately after the movie was over, they went to news broadcasts and they had reporters that were out actually talking to people, and they actually talked about the movie for like half of that night, or at least half of their news hour, half hour. And I don't know, I thought that was interesting because there were maybe a few TV movies over the years where they would do something like that, but not a lot.
Yeah. The only other one I remember that was America. Do you remember that one? That was one where like it was sort of like Red Dawn, like the Russians took over.
I think so.
Yeah, it didn't have so much of a profound. It was a little too over the top Hollywood, but
yeah,
they attempted to try to do that same kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, nothing had an impact like that movie. That was intense. So,
but we are now going to start moving away from movies like that, and we will continue on into some other. So I was going to show you this. I found this at a local used bookstore. So it has Children of Men, 12 Monkeys, and this movie called Doomsday, which I'd never heard of. And it was all one case. It was $6.
Okay.
So I was like, heck yeah, because I know we want to do at least 2 of those.
Yeah.
And then, so at some point, folks, we're going to be doing Jericho. We'll be doing both seasons, well, at least season and a half. The plan is we're going to try and do 2 episodes per podcast, because I think we can get enough done. And I don't think just doing one season in one podcast is justice enough. I think we want to because there's a lot of storylines that go through both of those, and I think it deserves at least doing that. It would be about, I think it's going to end up being about 15 podcasts that we'll just do over a period of time. But also we'll be doing Resident Evil. It'll be the first movie, and we will not be. And I mean, unless you have information, we will not be comparing it to the video game, because my understanding is there is no comparison. I mean, apparently the character of Alice never shows up in any of the video games. So the guy Anderson who wrote who directed the movie, I think just decided to very much scale down. I think he just took the name Resident Evil and then put in his wife, and just decided to make a whole series of movies around here. So that's okay. But we'll still be talking about it anyway.
Right.
So anything else that you wanted to bring up about this?
No. Yeah. No. That was. I feel like we covered it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you should see Threads though.
Okay.
Just as a as a comparison to see, because it was sort of the same idea, and they aired that in Europe. There's a BBC one, and it had that same kind of impact. But yeah, you should check that out.
Okay.
So
all right, folks. Well, thank you for joining us. Again, I'm not sure which movie we're going to be doing next, but we will have that up. Should be next weekend. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we will see you all in the next video. Take care, everybody.